Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Christy Data. I am the President and CEO of the Family Business Consulting Group, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion, where we're going to learn about some of the effective practices of high-performing boards through the story of ABARTA. So that you can best engage with today's discussion, a little overview of the GoToWebinar platform. There is an orange arrow on your screen that you can use to open and close the control panel for today's discussion. You can choose to participate in audio through your computer, as many of you probably are. If at any time you're having trouble with that system, please switch to telephone. You'll get an instruction on how to dial in so that you can listen in that way. We also will be taking questions throughout the conversation today, so you can put those in at any time in the questions box. We encourage you to post your questions early and often so that we can have a great dialogue with those of you who are here today and may have interest in what will be shared. Also, please note that we will have a recording available within 48 hours after the presentation. So you'll receive a separate email with access to that recording in the next day or two. If you don't receive that within a couple of days, please feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to make that available for you. And with that, we're going to jump into introducing today's panelists. We are very pleased to have with us today Jim Taylor, who is the chair of the board of ABARTA, who's going to share a little bit about his family's and business's story in corporate governance. Jim is the chair of the board and executive vice president of strategic initiatives. He is a third-generation owner and shareholder of ABARTA, whose principal business is Coca-Cola beverages. Jim joined ABARTA in 1985 and has held various positions in the publishing division at the Press of Atlantic City, in the beverage division at Buffalo Coca-Cola Bottling Company, in the energy division at ABARTA Oil and Gas, and on the corporate staff. In addition to the ABARTA board, Jim serves on and consults with boards of other privately held businesses and has spoken on various family business topics over the years. He is a member of ABARTA's Finance and Audit, Governance, and Directors' Compensation Committees. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Christy.
And our moderator for today's discussion is my colleague, Rob Sligh. Rob is a consultant for FBCG, helping enterprising families with business ownership and leadership succession, creating and improving family business fiduciary and advisory boards, planning and facilitating family and family council meetings, and guiding strategic planning processes. In addition to his work in consulting, prior to joining FBCG, Rob spent 33 years in his own multi-generational family business, including serving as chairman and CEO of Sligh Furniture and Clocks, which was a fourth-generation manufacturing and marketing company with a majority outside board of directors. Rob also has quite a bit of experience in his own board service and will bring his own perspective to today's discussion. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Christy. Thank you.
The impetus for this conversation is in part because of the honoring of ABARTA's board earlier this year for the 2023 Private Company Board of the Year, one of, I believe, 8 that were honored this year. And so as we get into the conversation, we'll talk a little bit about that award and what it recognizes, as well as the story that has brought us here. Before we jump into it, I do want to note that we value confidentiality. Jim has been gracious enough to share some of his experiences with us today. If we're talking about other family situations, those are either publicly available cases or have been approved for use by the family business described, or maybe hypotheticals or amalgams of those families' situations. And of course, this is an educational dialogue. It's meant to inform. It's not meant to be advice for your particular situation. We'd suggest that you contact your own advisors for anything that is of interest today. So before we jump into the conversation, let's take just a moment to learn about you. We have 2 poll questions we're going to ask. The first one is up on the screen, and that is, what are the generations that are currently owners or beneficial owners of your family enterprise? We'll take a moment for you all to respond. One of the things that we note is that the way that governance looks in different generations may be different. You may skew towards more formality in later generations. So it's always interesting to know who's with us. All right, I think we've got a good response. Let's share those results back to the group. So what we can see is we've got representation from first generation to fifth generation and beyond businesses, with a lot of energy around that second to third generation as well. Our second question for you is to select the situation that best describes your board. Do you have a board with majority independent directors, with an equal number of independents and family directors, a minority independent directors? Are you considering creating a board in the next year? Or do you have a board but no immediate plans for independent directors? Give it just a few more seconds. All right, let's share the results. Once again, we have representation across the board. Some of you, about a quarter of you, have a board in place with majority independent directors. So that's, you know, a relatively formal structure. But we have people across the spectrum, including, this looks like was maybe about 65% have independent directors currently. And the rest of you are either contemplating independent directors or are not there yet in terms of your development. With that, I'm going to hand over the conversation to Rob to get us started. Rob, feel free to share your thoughts on what you see in the polls, and then let's dive into the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that we have a lot of people in the audience who have independent directors on their board. We find that the presence of independent directors on boards means those companies on average over the long run will perform better. And so that's really great to see. We'll talk more about, you know, the proportion of independent directors on boards and get Jim's thoughts on that as well as we go along. But let me just say, hey, great to be with you, Jim. And congratulations on the award that you guys won at the Private Company Governance Summit this year. It was really a proud moment to see you up on stage. But maybe you could share, what does the award recognize?
Sure. Well, hello, everyone, for starters. And thank you, Rob, and thank you, Christy, for inviting me to chat with you today. Gosh, we're very proud of being named one of the best private boards. And it's an honor for me as the chair. It's an honor for our entire board, for our talented management team, and really all our associates. The Best Board Awards are given out once a year by a company called MLR Media, and they publish magazines, family business and family company director magazines. The award, I think, it recognizes how well developed and sophisticated your board is, and whether your board is adhering to best governance practices, and if your board has what kinds of challenges your board has helped you resolve, whether it's a crisis or a business turnaround or a CEO or generational succession. And we started our family council process about 30 years ago, and our first facilitator was a guy named John Ward, who a lot of people in this room might recognize that name. And he really pushed us to implement a fiduciary board with a majority of independent directors. And we did that about 27 years ago, I guess. So maybe the award, the fact we got the award it's also a recognition of our longevity and or maybe our perseverance.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We just had a question come in, and I want to use this as an example of, you know, if it fits in, we can take questions as we're going along. But the question has to do with, how does advisory board fit in with independent directors? And we note that you decided upon a fiduciary board with independent directors, but maybe you could compare and contrast, in your view, advisory board versus fiduciary board.
Sure. Really, they can serve the same purpose, which is to advise and counsel. And you have to be willing to listen to the the good advice that they give you. A lot of people I talk to who have not instituted a fiduciary board or do not have a majority of independent directors are for some reason leery or afraid of losing control of their company. And they really shouldn't be afraid of that. A good board will not usurp the control of the company. They'll only work hard to make you better.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think what you're pointing out is that the independent directors serve at the pleasure of the majority owners. And so even if they wanted to boss around the people in the business, if the owners of the business didn't want that guidance, then they would no longer be on the board. So
They can make changes.
it's not about losing power.
Right.
So
It's been a wonderful experience, actually, in terms of my own personal and professional growth. Having a board, having all that brain power and experience in the room makes everyone better.
Yeah. We're going to get into, I see a couple more questions have come in and we're going to get to those, but we really want to learn a little bit more about ABARTA itself. And, you know, your family has a rich history in this business story, and we'd like to hear more about it.
Sure. Okay. Well, this first slide, we often get asked, how did you come up with that name ABARTA? It's a kind of a strange name. And it really started I'm part of the third generation, and we also have fourth and fifth generations in our family as well. But the company was started in 1935 by a guy named Roland Adams, who was my maternal grandfather. Roland had 3 daughters and no sons. And back in that generation, women really didn't go to work in the family business very much. And so when they got married, one of the sisters got married to a guy named John Bitzer, another to a guy named George Rohr, and another to a guy named Donald Taylor. And that's how they came up with the name. But there was one person in the first generation. There were 3 people in the second generation and spouses. There are 5 in the third generation. We have 19 in the fourth generation, and we already have 12 in the fifth generation, ranging between, I think, about 10 years old and about 8 weeks old. Our motto has always been to, with our share ownership, our motto has always been to gift early and gift often. And company ownership has really flown very well through those 5 generations. There are only 2 G3 third generation shareholders left, and we own about 13% of the shares of the company. Almost 80% in the hands of the fourth generation and 8% in the hands of the fifth generation already. Christy, can you advance a slide, please? Okay, here's our modern corporate logo, and I'll let everybody just read that themselves. And Christy, the timeline now, please. Okay, as I said, the business started in 1935. My grandfather, Roland, was a bank examiner, and he was sent in to audit a couple bankrupt newspapers in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He did a good job. The bank ended up owning the papers. They gave him a minority interest, and he ran that, bought out his partners, and became a sole proprietor of the newspapers. Over the years, you can see we bought another newspaper, the Press of Atlantic City, got into the Coca-Cola business in 1953, bought various other Coke territories along the way, started an energy company in 1979, and that's the division I led for many years before we divested of it. And frozen food came along in 2007. And so our history has really been one of diversification for many of our years, getting into different businesses, starting up new businesses. And then we went through a period really starting in the 2000s where we divested a lot of our businesses and focused on the beverage business. And then in 2017, Coca-Cola Company refranchised all of North America, and we tripled in size with our beverage business. We're now about number 10 in the country. We have about 1,800 associates, and I think we'll sell about 50 million cases of soda this year. Can you advance it again, please? Okay, this is our ABARTA Coca-Cola beverages, and just one more slide, Christy. You can see our territory. We have most of the state of Pennsylvania, parts of Ohio, parts of West Virginia, and our motto is to quench the thirst of our neighbors.
Love that line, Jim. That's terrific. Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah. We got a couple more questions that came in, but I want Jim to get into the early stages of formal governance at the company. You might talk a little bit about when independent directors joined the board, how things were structured, how you got at it. One of the questions that is in the chat box is, how did you decide whether to use a consultant or not? And I think sometimes you did and sometimes you didn't. You sure did a lot of great things internally. But let us know about that, how you did the
Sure.
early stages of formal governance.
Sure. Okay. Well, we started our fiduciary board with a majority of independent directors started in 1996, so almost 30 years ago now. And it was really part of our transition from the second generation to the third generation. And at the time, the third generation was in their late 30s, mid to late 30s, and we really needed the gray hairs of experience in the room with us. We didn't have a lot of role models back then. We did not use a facilitator. We didn't really use anybody that created our board. And frankly, we weren't very good at it for a lot of years. I think we really started hitting our stride about 15 years ago or so, but we learned a lot of lessons along the way. But over time, we've just continued to formalize our board process, formalized its structure, developed some committees. We have a finance and audit committee, a governance and a comp committee as well. We have charters written for everything. We have calendars of events. We look at it as a process, and we've tried to kind of document that process and make it repeatable. And one of the really one of the really good things that we did was learn how to craft board agendas. Okay, a lot of board meetings, I'm on other boards as well, there tends to be a lot of reporting. On our agendas, we like to do a lot of deep dives on important topics that are facing the company. And the key point here is to try and figure out how to make your board meetings interactive, how to make them collaborative. And we have all this brain power and valuable experience in the room. How do we tap into that? And I don't think it's our term, but we try and capture the collective genius in the room. And that's one of the things that makes us better. It's one of the great things about a board.
One of the questions that came up, Jim, just now is having to do with, I think what they're talking about is specialization, where you might say, well, we need a digital expert or a software expert on the board. On the other hand, you might have the opportunity to hire a consultant to help you with that. Can you talk about maybe some examples of what you would see as an appropriate seat for a board member compared to hiring a consultant for that functional area?
Okay, I could probably make arguments in both directions. but we used to keep a board matrix basically when we were highly diversified, and we had a board member with publishing industry experience. We had a board member with energy experience. We had a board member with consumer packaged goods experience. Different industry experiences was kind of one axis on the grid, and then functional experience was the other, whether it's marketing, strategy, finance, and board seats are valuable. And so if you really think that it's a critical enough area, you want to dedicate a board position to that, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to hire a third party outsider to just come help advise you, that's okay as well.
That makes sense. Want to get to some of the major milestones or transition points in ABARTA's governance journeys, and that might answer some of the questions. To the extent it doesn't, we're going to engage in some dialogue on those questions as well. But let's start out with major milestones in your view.
Sure. Okay, these are our ABARTA core values. We have 6 of them. I'll let everybody just read these on your own. And, you know, as with anything, boards included, it's really all about the people. And in addition, I think it's all about the values that you live by, that you follow, and the culture that you want to create in your company. Most of the people that have served either currently or in the past on our board have really been servant leaders. And when we do have board meetings, we talk things through. We usually don't count the votes. We strive to reach consensus whenever we can. An interesting dynamic that we have on our board is if we say we want to move forward with something and people just look at us and say, do you want us to vote on this right now? It oftentimes means go back to the drawing table, work on it some more, and then we'll talk about it again next quarter. But you know, for the most part, our boards have constructively challenged us and are thinking as leaders. At the same time, they support us, they encourage us along the way, and really support us when we fall down, which we do occasionally as well. But in terms of tough issues our board's dealt with, you know, diversifying and building the business really preceded our formal board, but our pivot to kind of streamline the company, shut down some of our money-losing startups, to divest the newspaper business first, which being a family business, we waited too long to do that. It was one of our legacy businesses, and it was tough to let go of that. Our frozen food business and our energy business that we also exited, and certainly the decision to go all in beverage, to triple the size of our beverage. We talked about you know, a fish swallowing a whale, and it really had some of the attributes of that, but it was a huge decision for us to do that. Huge decision. But we've had other challenges. We've had high leverage at different times. We have pension liabilities. We had corporate overhead that was too high that we had to bring back into focus, and they really helped us with a pretty difficult but successful transition in family CEOs during our generation as well. And nobody's ever lost sight of our core values that whole time. Even when you're divesting businesses, we care a lot about the people that are going to be left behind.
Yeah, you sure do. I think you have a great reputation in that regard. ABARTA has a third generation family CEO, your cousin, and you're the third generation family chair. Talk about how the board is in the process of discussing succession.
Sure. Yes, we're deep in our transition from the third to the fourth generation. I my runway is probably about another 2 years, and my cousin Charlie, who's CEO, his runway is probably about another 7. And you really have to get things right in a couple different dimensions. One is the ownership succession. And as I said before, over 85% of our stock is already in the hands of our G4s and G5s. So we feel good about that. We also have a pretty robust family council process, a place where hopefully not only our generation, but succeeding generations can stay aligned. And the G4, who really are very active in the family council process, and they're a smart group, and they're really stepping up quite enthusiastically. So happy about the ownership succession part. Governance succession. This year we selected and seated our first 4th generation family director on the board, and they have full director status. They're a fiduciary director just like everybody else. We also have a good pipeline of people that we have been putting through our board observer process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Our bylaws state that we will always have a family owner as chair of the board, and so we have to get the G4 ready to assume that position probably in the next 7 years. So still have some work to do there. Leadership succession, we only have 1 out of our 19 4th generation owners working in the business, and he's in a mid-level job right now. So we're expecting to have our first non-family CEO in place before my cousin retires in about 2029, I think it is. But we know we have to have a really well-developed and well-functioning family council process and a business governance process to support and balance having a non-family CEO. And I've started thinking a little bit about the future of ABARTA is almost like a mini public company. We're going to have 25 to 35 passive owners, and need to have a strong board to oversee business management, not only in terms of performance, but in terms of the values that we hold dear, our vision, our goals for the family. And we certainly wouldn't want to see them drift over time with the non-family leader of the business.
Yeah, that makes sense. We had a question that came in having to do with the communication between the family governance and the board. Mm-hmm. Typically things like vision, values, and business performance expectations. But could you talk about that communication and what are the types of things that owners weigh in on, and how that impacts how the board proceeds?
Sure. Well, one of my roles, I think, as chair, and others also serve this role, is really to gauge the sentiment and the level of consensus among the family members. And there's certainly a lot of consensus around our values. There's consensus around our vision. There's commitment to continued ownership of the company. And all those are extremely critical to communicate with the board. If we were setting up the business to sell it in a few years, that's a completely different message than saying we're thinking in terms of decades, if not generations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. There's so many things that ABARTA and ABARTA's board does well. I'm thinking, strategy, succession supported by rigorous bench strength analysis, your lead independent director, how you onboard new directors. Maybe you could talk about some of those excellent processes that you have.
Sure. I'll take strategy first. And strategy for many years at our company and on our board, company management would go away and develop the business strategy and kind of hand it to the board and say, help us achieve this. And more recently, the board's played a much larger role in our strategy. And today we really talk about strategy a lot. And it's become a pretty collaborative process between the board and management. We're actually refreshing our strategic plan right now. And we've had one short meeting, one very long meeting, and another one scheduled for February to do nothing but talk strategy. And those are outside of our regular quarterly board meetings. Succession, I guess, is the second one you asked about. And my cousin Charlie likes to tell a story. In 2019, he was in his new role as CEO for probably 30 days. And the board started asking him about his successor. And Charlie kind of chuckled when he first heard that, and he said, "What, am I doing such a lousy job that you're already thinking of replacing me?" But anyway, succession and bench strength are critical to companies, not only at the top but throughout all the levels. And our board that's one of their key focuses. And as my cousin Charlie can attest. But the third one I think you asked about was our lead independent director, which we like to shorten everything, and we call that individual the lid. And but anyway, it's a really critical board position, and if you don't have it, I would strongly recommend exploring it. But it's usually filled by we fill it with the independent that usually has the longest tenure on the board and with the family, because they understand the family, they understand the values, they understand the culture, and can help support all those things. The lid's job, just similar to gauging the level of consensus, sentiment and consensus on the family council, the lid's job is to gauge the level of to gauge the sentiment and level of consensus among the independent directors. We actually dedicate 1 hour of each of our board meetings to an independent only session. And so all the owners, all the management leave the room. It's just the independents. I have no idea what they talk about, but they use the time to all get on the same page and hash things out and get on the same page. Our lid has traditionally also helped to mentor the family CEO and the family chair. It oftentimes is someone that's had a lot of board tenure on other people's boards as well, so they can bring an outside perspective to bear on that, which I think is great. And onboarding, we're trying to evolve our onboarding process even more today. Of course, there's a lot of facts and figures that you have to convey to board members to get them up to speed with your business. But the softer skills, the values and the vision, the culture are critically important. We have had some occasions where independent directors have had relatively short tenures on our board, and those short tenures are usually associated directly with those softer skills. And anyway, but if they don't get we want a collaborative process. We want everything constructive. We want the collective genius. And if a director if it becomes clear the director's not going to get there, a shorter tenure is better for everyone involved. But it is a tough transition.
That makes sense. I think that's another thing you guys do well and with grace. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about your board observer, I think what you call the associate advisor program. It's really one of the best that I've become aware of, and I'd love to have you fill us in on those processes.
Sure. Yes, we do call it the Associate Advisor Program. We played with some different names, Associate Director, but we didn't want to confer any fiduciary duty on these people. But we've started the program 5 or 6 years ago now, and we're in the middle of onboarding our third set of associate advisors. And we initially developed the program as really as to create a pool of candidates for our next generation family directors. And like they say in Hamilton, there's no better way to do that than being in the room. And because you really get to experience the how dynamic board meetings can be and the personalities in the board meeting. Now we've kind of we really view the process as helpful to all of the next generation, and we've invited the spouses of the next generation to apply for associate advisor roles as well. And we really want to expose as many people as we can to our business governance process. And when we created the associate advisor program, we have a committee on the family council side. It kind of bridges family council and the business. It's called the Next Generation Committee. And the Next Generation Committee deals with things like family employment, governance, the associate advisor program, and it's chaired by one of our independent directors, actually a former independent director. He has rotated off our board. He was on our board for 12 or 13 years, I believe, and he rotated off, but knows the family extremely well, and we've asked him to stay on in that role. The associate advisor program, has a formal application process, including essays. It has an interview process, and we stagger the start dates of, we bring on 2 at a time, but we stagger their start dates so that, the newest associate advisor can learn from the more experienced associate advisor, have a little overlap there. And we have the associate advisors are expected to become fully prepared to fully participate. We pay them, but modestly compared to our other director slots. And one of the best things I think about our program is we have a mentor program. Each of our associate advisors, we pair them up with an independent director. And so they can ask whatever questions they want to the independent director and get feedback after the meeting. Independents will often kind of funnel associate advisors, that would be a great question if you ask. And sometimes the associate advisors, particularly the first couple of board meetings, tend to be kind of quiet. Maybe they're a little intimidated, and so it helps prime the pump. And then we also do periodic assessments with the associate advisors, and ask them what's going well, what's not going so well, how's the mentoring relationship. My wife is one of her, my wife, who's also our family council co-chair at this point in time, is also a family business practitioner, and one of her areas of practice is mentoring. And so she brought a pretty robust mentoring plan to this, to the program. Everybody who's gone through it has just loved it, and we have a waiting list of people that want to actually go through it.
Thanks, Jim. One of the questions that had come in had to do with how you handle the possibility of family directors. Do you see this as a program that might later result in family directors who aren't necessarily involved in the business but could be involved in the board? Or more broadly, how do you view the track for the possibility of family directors on your board as compared to independent directors?
Sure. Well, our bylaws stipulate two things as in regard to our board of directors. One is that we always have one more independent director than we have family directors. Right now we have 3 family directors on the board, 2 third generation and our first 4th generation. And so obviously we have 4 independent directors to go along with that. We've done some talking because you want truly wonderful family directors on the board at all times and in each generation. And we've had some really good discussions at our family council about whether spouses, if we have a spouse who would make a great director, do we bring a spouse onto our board? And the second thing in our bylaws is that the chair of the board will always be a family director as well. So we still need to do some work around that, but we have, I'm chair now, my cousin Charlie will be taking over from me once I'm no longer on the scene, but then when Charlie also retires, it's all going to be the next generation doing everything.
We had a couple of questions come in having to do with kind of advancing this discussion of how do the owners communicate with the board.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was having to do with if there's a major acquisition or divestiture or capital investment, do the owners weigh in on that, or is that a board decision? Another one was having to do with is there ever any written information or objectives that come from the owner group to the board so that the board can see that the business is run in line with those?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Christy, can you put up the next slide, please? And that would probably be a good talking point to try and answer those questions. Okay. Excuse me. So this is a governance flow chart that I created many years ago. And just to kind of walk through it first, and then hopefully to answer your questions as well. There's a lot of governance going on in our family business. And on the left, you see our family governance, our family council, and we talk about it as dealing with the business of the family. And that contrasts to the right-hand side, which is the corporate governance, which is the board of directors, which is the business of the business. And people talk about boundaries. That's why these two are very separate. We don't want the business of the family and the business of the business to get in each other's way, basically. And in the middle, we have a family voting trust. In 1996, when we first developed our board, it was the same year when everyone in the second generation sold their voting shares back to the company, and we have a grand total of 2 voting shares left out of some 3 million shares outstanding. And those are held in a family voting trust, which was structured at the time as to really balance interests. We have 2 different families in the business, the Bitzers and the Taylors, and they're represented. We also had in my generation, we had active and inactive owners as well. And so there's really 4 positions and represents those 4 different boxes. Someone asked earlier about communicating with the board. It's extremely important for the family to communicate with the board. And you know, there's obvious expectations about profitability and growth. We also communicate with the board. We have a 10% dividend payout ratio, which is fairly small for family businesses. And we've communicated that to the board. We also are very charitably minded, and the family's given the board a charitable gifting policy as well. that they follow. Anyway, and it's important for the board to complete the loop on the bottom and fulfill those shareholder expectations. The family voting trust, their most important job is to elect a slate of directors. And the slate of directors is developed by the governance or nominating committee on the board, and that includes independents and family directors. And then they make the recommendation to the family voting trust, and the family voting trust votes up or down on that slate. They do not vote up or down on individual directors, but rather the slate of directors. The other important thing the family voting trust does, if there is a major decision such as an acquisition or a divestiture, and it has to be of a sizable dollar amount in order for them to vote on it, but they come into the process, and communication and transparency is also something we strive for. And the family council, my cousin Charlie, as CEO, gives at every family council meeting we have, he gives a report on the state of the business and look forward on the business. So I would say we keep the family very well informed about what's going on in the business.
Yeah,
did that answer the questions?
I think so, and we've had some others come in, so let me ask you these.
Okay. Sure.
We have a couple questions that have to do with your processes for finding and recruiting and bringing on board independent directors. Can you talk a little bit about that process at ABARTA?
Okay. I'm not sure I could say we have a consistent process for doing that. One of our best sources of potential board candidates are people that our current directors happen to know. And maybe they serve with them on another board, and they just like the way they think, like the way they assimilate information, like the way they talk. And so that's been a good source for us. I'm also involved in YPO, which is the Young Presidents Organization. And we've had some YPOers that have come on our board, just people that I knew and I thought would be valuable additions to the board. We've also used outside people to do it. Family Business Consulting Group has done a couple searches for us, and they've also acted as filters for the names that we've brought in as well. So we've sourced people from a variety of different places.
Yeah, thanks. You sure have, and that's true of a lot of firms. We had a question come in. After you have the basics covered, things like matrix and governance practices and so on, what's the thing that makes the difference in a higher performing board?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I can give it a satisfactory answer. Some of it's luck, for sure, but I really think it has to do with people and their personalities and how they interact with each other is one thing. You don't want your board to, constructively challenging management is a great thing, but not being constructive but being challenging is not a positive. And but I think a lot of it is an art. I'm chair of the board. I don't wield a heavy gavel. I don't even own a gavel, but I oftentimes let conversations meander and see where they're going to come out. And sometimes surprising results, but usually results we're very pleased with.
Yeah, makes sense. That's kind of like the Holy Grail. We go after that higher performance on a continuous basis, and I think we never quite arrive, but it's the striving toward it that's important.
Right. And there's that old analogy about, I'm not sure how it goes, about someone entering a stream. It's forever changed. You introduce a new person in the room. Of course, the chemistry is going to change every time you have a fresh, brand new group of people with every new addition or subtraction from that group.
Well said. Well, let's shift gears and talk about the G4s, the next gens.
Mm-hmm.
How do they feel about being owners together in this business now and leading into the future?
Well, it's coming on very quickly, actually. I think the G4 really feels the business is a touchstone, and we actually had a hiatus. We started family planning in about 1993, and we had a hiatus in the middle of that where we took a couple of years off, and it's actually the fourth generation that was the impetus for us re-engaging and reinitiating our family council process. And I think it's been wonderful. And ABARTA has, I believe we have a committed group of next gen owners of ABARTA. I think they view it as a very good investment and don't want to liquidate that investment. You know, there's only 3 of us with a couple of years left in order to pass along our knowledge and make the final push to prepare our G4, and we're really working hard at doing that. I think we're successful. You know, the 3rd generation is ready to kind of pass the baton, and I think the 4th generation is ready to take it up and run with it, and or at least in the very near future. You know, 30 years ago, when we started our family council process with John Ward, we came up with a very aspirational family mission statement, which was to be a strong family and a model of success for family business. And we hope we can continue both of those, and but always more to be written. So stay tuned.
We will stay tuned for sure. 3 questions that came up.
Sure.
Maybe we can field these. Let's see if we can within the time limits. One, actually, a couple of them have to do with board compensation. How do you determine the pay? What references might you use? And the other has to do with term limits or age limits that you may or may not have on your board.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm just writing that down so I can remember. But compensation first, I have not found that many data points for private board compensation. I really haven't. The NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors, puts out a survey annually, I believe, and there's a couple other sources. People in the family business community here in Pittsburgh, if they, I have friends that will pass surveys between each other so that we can get some more data points. Usually on the survey, there's you know, there's of course cash compensation, and then there's equity compensation, whether it's shadow equity or actual equity, and that tends to trip us up a little bit in the compensation analysis because we do not offer our directors equity participation. If we have a particularly good year, perhaps we'll have a discretionary bonus for our directors as well. We pay our directors about $40,000 to $45,000 a year, and there's also additional compensation for being a committee chair, and we work our directors hard between meetings as well, whether it's talking strategy or whatnot, and so we use per diems for that as well. So, you know, if they're doing heavy lifting on the governance committee, doing a new director search, if they're doing heavy lifting on the comp committee and doing some market-based studies for different positions in the company. So whatever time they put in, we ask them, just raise your hand. We want this to be fair. Nobody's going to audit the amount of work you put in, but we want it to feel fair to you. So the other was about age limits. This really preceded our creation of the fiduciary board in 1996, but we did have a couple not quite so independent directors on an advisory board before that. And I remember going to those meetings. I was pretty young at the time, but we had one director who typically fell asleep about 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the middle of the meeting. And so he instituted age 70 as an age limit. And but we've never really applied that except in this one situation. But it was a way to gracefully ask for this person to withdraw from the board. And actually, our best, we do have the expectation we put out for new directors is that they'll serve on the board for a minimum of 5 years. And we do have a term limit of 10 years. Having said that, when you find a really good director, you want to keep them forever, or longer than 10 years at least. And our current lid on our board, I believe, is in our 13th year, and we've had several other directors that have continued on our board after that 10-year term limit.
Thank you, Jim. You know, it's the time has flown by. I feel like we could keep talking for another hour, but in deference to our audience, we're going to wrap it up, and I will turn it back to Christy for the wrap up.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Jim, for your thoughtful reflections on your experiences in your role as chair and with what is truly an inspiring board. I do want to share a little bit of information with folks as we wrap up today. We will, if you are interested in more information about boards and related kinds of activities, we do have a number of resources on our website, content, and we partner with boards to help them, support them in the things that they're trying to achieve in terms of their own board development. You'll get some information about that after the session if you're interested on how to reach out about that. Also on our website, you will find a ton of additional readings, materials, recordings of other webinars, and other things that you can tap into. If today sparked some new questions for you about board development, that's another great place to stop to ask more. There's a search field right at the top of the corner. You can ask pretty much anything you want to know about boards and family business, and there's likely to be a resource for you to take advantage of. I wanted to again thank you, Rob, for moderating this discussion and helping us chart a course through Jim's story. And Jim, again, thank you for the time and the reflection and your generosity with being with us today. Much appreciated.
You are quite welcome.
And finally, if you're still with us, shortly after this session, you're going to be invited to complete a survey about the webinar today. We would love if you would take a few minutes to respond and let us know what you thought. We really do use your feedback in designing the next time that we might come to you with this kind of program. And so thank you all for attending with us today. I appreciate your time as well, and we hope we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.